The island-hopping campaign started by the US pushed the Japanese all the way back to the Philippines, and the Japanese inner defense ring was breached when the United States captured most of the Mariana Islands, giving them the ability to send the large B-29 superfortress system bombard the Japanese home islands. Invasion of the Marianas in 1944 forced Japan to use most of their carriers to sink the American carriers, which were their greatest threat. The Battle of the Philippine Sea occurred in June, and their fleet carriers Taiho, Shokaku, and Hio sank, while most others were damaged by dive bombers. Most of the aircrew and aircraft were shot down by Hellcats and Corsairs in the Marianas Turkish route, so large-scale Japanese carrier operations were more or less impossible. They still had a strong surface force with large guns. The 2 Yamato-class battleships were ready, as well as a couple of Kongos, a couple of Fusos, Iseis, and the Nagato. Heavy cruisers were still in large numbers. All 4 Takawas were still operational, the 3 Mogamis, 2 Toneis, 4 Miyokos, and Aoba, bringing the total up to 9 battleships and 14 heavy cruisers. Their carrier force was small, only 4 of them in operational state, the last survivor of the Pearl Harbor raid Zuikaku, and the smaller converted Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda. The Americans, on the other hand, were preparing for invasion of new islands. 2 invasion targets were put on the table, either the Philippines or Formosa, now called Taiwan. While Formosa could serve as a base for an invasion of mainland China, General Douglas MacArthur, who promised that he will return to the Philippines, thought that Formosa would be unnecessary. So after meetings, the invasion target would be the Philippines, and the invasion would start at the island of Leyte in central Philippines. The Allied naval plan was to support the invasion with Halsey's 3rd Fleet, which also featured Task Force 38, a large carrier force commanded by Vice Admiral Mark Major. The Japanese prepared for 4 victory plans, Shogo 1 being major naval operations in the Philippines, Shogo 2 at Formosa, Shogo 3 in the Ryukyu Islands, and Shogo 4 at Kuril Islands. In October 1944, a series of large-scale carrier raids against Formosa and the Ryukyu Islands convinced the Japanese to start Operation Shogo 2, launching waves of air attacks against 3rd Fleet's carriers. Around 600 Japanese aircraft were shot down in 3 days, almost losing their entire air strength in the region. When the invasion of the Philippines began, the Japanese Navy began Operation Shogo 1. This called for a small carrier force, which would sail from the north to lure American carriers away from the Japanese battleships. The southern force would push their small force up Surigao Strait, while the center force under the command of Vice Admiral Takeo Kurita, which was the most powerful force, would push through the San Bernardino Strait into the Philippine Sea, turning southwards and then attacking the landing area. This would be their last chance for a victory, and if they lose in the Philippines, they would surely lose the war altogether. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was on the horizon, and it would be the largest naval battle in history, with over 350 warships in total, not including transport ships. 4 major engagements would occur in this battle. In this video, we'll talk about the southern force and its attempt to push through the Surigao Strait, and the northern force and its successful baiting mission. Let's start with the southern force under the command of both Admirals Nishimura and Shima. The admirals brought 14 ships together to create the southern force. 2 battleships were in this formation, the Fuso and Yamashiro. Nishimura's force consisted of the 2 Fusos, Mogami, and 4 destroyers, these being Shigure, Michishio, Asugumo, and Yamagumo. Shima's force consisted of 2 Nachi-class heavy cruisers, the Nachi and Ashigara, a Nagara-class light cruiser named Abukuma, and the destroyers Akabono, Ushio, Kasumi, and Shiranui. Plan was to push up the Surigao Strait to attack the landing ships. Due to strict radio silence from the center and southern forces, Nishimura was unable to synchronize his movements with Shima and Kurita. The 2 southern fleets were at the time of Nishimura's push into Surigao Strait at 0200 hours, around 25 nautical miles away from each other, while Kurita was still in the Sibuyan Sea. Americans, on the other hand, thought that the most likely enemy approach was up the Surigao Strait, and they would place a strong surface force in between the landings and the strait itself. This force, under the command of J.C. Oldendorf, consisted of 6 old standard battleships, most of them being Pearl Harbor veterans. The 6 battleships present were the West Virginia, Maryland, Mississippi, Tennessee, California, and Pennsylvania. Combined main gun firepower was at 48 14-inch guns and 16 16-inch guns. 4 heavy cruisers, these being the Louisville, Portland, Minneapolis, and Shropshire, with a total main gun count at 35 8-inch guns. 4 light cruisers, the Denver, Columbia, Phoenix, and Boise carried a total of 54 6-inch guns. 28 destroyers and 39 torpedo boats were also inside this massive force to provide torpedo attacks and early warning of an incoming attack. Plan was to have the torpedo boats forward to swarm the enemy with torpedoes, followed by destroyers with their 5-inch guns and torpedoes. If the Japanese still managed to get through, the last line of the strongest ships would wait for the enemy to get close to destroy the force completely. The last line was placed in a way to use the classic naval warfare tactic called crossing the T. A battle line, in this case the American formation would be placed in a parallel line, giving them the chance to fire with their entire broadsides on the first ship of the enemy battle line heading straight towards the Allied. After the first ship is destroyed, the second one is targeted and so on. The attackers can only fire with their forward guns, much less firepower compared to the defender's entire broadside. At 9:08 on October 24, 1944, Nishimura's fleet was spotted and attacked by 27 aircraft from Enterprise. These aircraft attacked the Japanese ships, causing mostly light damage. At 22:36, PT boats made contact with the Southern Force. For more than 3.5 hours, the much smaller PT boats attacked the Japanese formation, but no torpedoes managed to hit their targets. Shortly after the PT attack, destroyers started to attack the Southern Force with torpedoes, and at about 3 in the night, both Japanese battleships would be hit by torpedoes. Torpedoes from USS Melvin managed to sink Fuso, while Yamashiro steamed on. Fuso exploded into two halves and remained afloat for some time before sinking. 2 or 3 torpedoes hit Fuso on the starboard side, which caused an oil fire. 2 of Nishimura's 4 destroyers also sank. The damaged Asaguma was turning back, but it later sank. 16 minutes later, West Virginia's radar picked up the remaining Nishimura's force and tracked them as they approached. At 3:53, West Virginia opened fire, and the rest of the battle line joined her shortly after. Yamashiro and Bangami were heavily damaged by 14 and 16-inch shells, as well as the 8-inch shells from the heavy cruisers. At 4:05, a torpedo hit Yamashiro, fired from the destroyer Benyan, and Yamashiro sank at 4:20 with Nishimura on board. Mogami and Shigure retreated down the strait. The destroyer Albert W. Grant was hit by friendly fire during the battle, but the destroyer survived. The second striking force under the command of Vice Admiral Shima approached the area, and the torpedo from the PT boat PT-137 hit the cruiser Abukuma. The cruiser fell out of the formation shortly after. The rest of the second striking force spotted the survivors of Nishimura's fleet, and in the darkness, the Nachi collided with Mogami, flooding Mogami's steering room, causing even more damage. The Mogami would be attacked by carrier aircraft the next morning, and the Akebono scuttled the ship with a torpedo after it was abandoned. Kamikaze attacks were sent off to attack Taffy 1 in daytime. One kamikaze hit the escort carrier Senti, while the Japanese submarine attacked the same carrier, hitting her with 1 torpedo. The Suwannee was hit by 2 kamikazes in the course of a couple of days. So the outcome of the Battle of Surigao Strait was as followed. Out of 7 ships of Nishimura's fleet, only Shigure survived, while all of Shima's ships also survived. Japan lost 2 battleships, a heavy cruiser and 3 destroyers. The Americans only lost 1 PT boat. Up to the north, Vice Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa sailed south with his northern force, built around the 4 carriers of the 3rd Carrier Division. The 4 carriers were the Zuikaku, Zuiho, Chitose, and Chiyoda. Zuikaku was the last surviving carrier of the Pearl Harbor raid. 4 out of 6 sank at Midway, and Shokaku sank in the Battle of the Philippine Sea. The northern force also sailed with 2 battleships, the partially converted to carriers Issei and Hyuga. The rear 2 turrets were removed on each of the ships, and a small hangar was placed on the stern. No heavy cruisers were in this force, but there were 3 light cruisers, the Oyodo, Tama, and Isuzu, and 9 destroyers. The northern force was a decoy force to lure Halsey's carriers north, and if that's completed, the center force would push forward without trouble. Only 108 aircraft were distributed on the 4 carriers, and some of these would be sent on Task Force 38. The Japanese decoy force was located around 1640 on October 24th, and multiple American carrier task groups sailed to close the distance and launch their strikes. Task Force 38 was significantly stronger compared to the Japanese carrier force. 5 fleet carriers, these being the Intrepid, Franklin, Lexington, Enterprise, and Essex. 5 light Independence class carriers, these being Independence herself, as well as Bella Wood, Langley, Cabot, and San Jacinto. 6 fast battleships were present as well, the Alabama, Iowa, New Jersey, Washington, and Massachusetts. 2 heavy and 6 light cruisers as well as 41 destroyers were also present. A total of up to 1,000 aircraft were available on the 10 carriers. In the night of October 25th, Halsey detached Task Force 34, which was built around the 6 battleships under the command of Vice Admiral Lee. Plan was to push forward with the battle force, while constant airstrikes wore down the enemy. At the dawn on October 25th, 75 aircraft from Ozawa's force were launched from the 4 carriers to attack 3rd Fleet, but most were shot down by fighters and anti-aircraft guns, and no damage was caused to the Allied ships. The survivors of the strike made their way to land bases on Luzon. At dawn, Mitchell ordered the first strike wave of 180 aircraft before the Japanese fleet was even located. At 7:10, the northern force was spotted and the first wave flew straight towards it. At around 8 in the morning, the aircraft attacked the Japanese ships. Their combat air patrol only consisted of about 30 planes. 527 sorties were flown in multiple waves against the 4 Japanese carriers, sinking Zuikaku, Zuiho, and Chitose, as well as the destroyer Akizuki, and the carrier Chiyoda and cruiser Tama were crippled. Zuikaku, the flagship of the Northern Force, was specifically targeted by one of the 4 waves, and the fleet carrier was hit by 7 torpedoes and 9 bombs. She was listing to port, and Ozawa shifted his flag to the cruiser Oyodo. The order to abandon Zuikaku was issued at 13:58. The surviving crew climbed to the starboard side, and one of the last pictures of the ship was made. Zuikaku rolled over and sank stern first at 14:14, taking with her over 800 of her crew. The destruction of the Kirubutai carriers was complete, avenging the deaths of the residents and sailors at Hawaii. The crippled Chiyoda was finished off by gunfire from Allied cruisers and destroyers. At about the same time as the first strike engaged the carriers, desperate messages calling for assistance began to come from the 7th Fleet. Poor communications led to Halsey not sending his battleship south at the time he received the first reports. 3,000 nautical miles away in Pearl Harbor, Admiral Chester Nimitz, who also received desperate calls from Taffy 3, sent a message to Halsey. Turkey trots the water GG from Sinpak. Action, com, 3rd Fleet, info, coming, CTF 77X, where RPT, where is Task Force 34, RR, the World Wonders. Why was the message sent like this? Well, the first and last 4 words were used to confuse enemy crypto analytics. The comms staff on Halsey's flagship correctly deleted the first section of the padding, but retained the last 3 words in the message, which was handed to Halsey. Halsey read the message, and the last words, the World Wonders, were criticisms from Nimitz, so Halsey threw his cap on the deck and broke into sobs of rage. Rear Admiral Robert Carney confronted him, telling him to stop it and to pull himself together. After more than 3 hours of the first distress message was received, Halsey ordered Task Force 34 to turn southwards towards Samar. Task Force 34 arrived too late, and it assisted in picking up the survivors of Taffy 3. At 16:22, Halsey formed a new task group, this being Task Group 34.5 under Rear Admiral Oscar C. Badger II. It was built around Iowa and New Jersey, and some destroyers and cruisers were added to this unit as well. Cruisers from this task group found the Japanese destroyer Milwaukee and sank it with all hands, including survivors from Chikuma. At just over 11 in the night, the submarine Halao torpedoed and sank the light cruiser Tama. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was over. Throughout the battle, the Allied forces lost at least 12 warships. These were the light carrier Princeton, 2 escort carriers, these being Gambier Bay and St. Lo, 2 destroyers, these being Hoyle and Johnston, 2 destroyer escorts, these being the Eversole and Samuel B. Roberts, and 1 PT boat, the PT-493. Japanese lost 28 warships during the battle, 1 fleet carrier, 3 light carriers, 3 battleships, one of these being the Musashi, one of the largest battleships in history, 6 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, and 11 destroyers. The Japanese Navy suffered its greatest loss of ships and crew. The failure to destroy or force the Allies to retreat eventually led to the loss of the Philippines, cutting Japan's occupied territories in Southeast Asia. The loss at Leyte opened the way for the invasions of the Ryukyu Islands in 1945. Only 1 major sortie was conducted after the battle in April 1945, this being Operation Tengo, where the largest battleship Yamato sank with its escorts by American carrier aircraft. This battle was the first battle that brought the kamikazes into the war, and these attacks would be common by the time of the invasion of Iwo Jima and Okinawa.